12 years after my ex-girlfriend, who slept with my brother just before our wedding, reaches out, I find myself on the brink of revenge. I'm a 38-year-old man, preparing to marry my beautiful girlfriend, a 35-year-old woman, in less than a week. This will be my second engagement. A dozen years ago, I almost tied the knot with my high school sweetheart, my ex, who is now 38. We'd been together for nearly a decade, and everything seemed perfect. Our families loved her, and they were thrilled when I announced our engagement. But just one day before the wedding, everything shattered when she betrayed me. She'd asked me to stay at a hotel the night before our wedding, convinced that it would bring bad luck to spend the night together. I agreed, but fate had other plans. I realized I'd forgotten my shoes and rushed back home to get them, expecting to find her preparing for our big day. Instead, I was met with the most devastating sight imaginable, my ex in bed with my younger brother, completely oblivious to my presence. The moment froze me in place. I couldn't comprehend the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. My heart shattered as I bolted from the house, my ex calling after me as I drove back to the hotel, hyperventilating and refusing to accept what I'd just seen. Once back in my hotel room, I finally broke down, sobbing for what felt like an eternity. Luckily, I hadn't shared my location with my ex, so she could only reach out through texts. Her messages were filled with apologies and excuses, claiming it was a one-time mistake and that she'd needed to blow off steam. I couldn't believe she was trying to rationalize her actions, so I blocked her and my brother without a second thought. It took time, but I managed to pull myself together and cancel the wedding arrangements. The money I lost was worth it. I was determined to escape the chaos she'd brought into my life after nearly a decade together. I called my parents, who were left stunned, unsure whether to comfort me or confront my brother. After giving them time to process the betrayal, I ordered some dinner and cried myself to sleep. In the years that followed, I only saw my ex twice, once when she came to collect her things, and then years later at a party, where she attempted to speak to me, but I left as soon as I recognized her. My brother and I have been estranged since then. My parents cut him off, and the last I heard, he was working in Europe and hadn't returned in 3 years. Fast forward to now, I've moved on, finding love again with a woman I trust completely. Just days before my wedding, however, my past comes crashing back. My ex reached out through a new Facebook account, sending me a barrage of messages expressing her devastation at hearing about my upcoming marriage. Her use of the word again struck me, as we'd never actually been married. The pleas for forgiveness echoed in my mind like a twisted déjà vu, leaving me unsettled. I confided in my fiancé, sharing my mixed emotions. Part of me was infuriated, but a darker part craved revenge. I knew I'd handled the past with maturity, but now I wanted to ensure she experienced the same heartbreak I did. My fiancé, who had her own past with betrayal, understood my feelings and was fully on board with our plan for revenge. So, after mulling it over for a couple of hours, I decided to respond to my ex, telling her I was finally ready to talk. She was ecstatic and suggested meeting immediately, but I told her to book a hotel room, promising to join her the next day to keep my fiancé unaware of what was unfolding. The next day, I arrived at the hotel, and my ex was overflowing with emotion, her eyes brimming with tears of joy as she greeted me. But soon, those tears would turn to horror. As she began her heartfelt apology, explaining her regret over the past 12 years, I listened intently, feigning interest while I awaited my fiancé's arrival. Almost 20 minutes in, a knock echoed through the room. I opened the door to find my fiancé, flanked by our groomsmen and bridesmaids, all wearing masks emblazoned with my brother's face. They wheeled in a cake that also bore his likeness, a twisted tribute to the past. We yelled, "Surprise!" as my ex's face drained of color, shock etched in every feature. The scene was surreal, and it was clear she had never anticipated such a turn of events. We'd convinced the hotel staff that we were there to surprise her, using her own instructions to let in any guest who wished to visit. After she finally grasped the reality of the situation. What was happening? My ex was sobbing and mumbling incoherent words through her tears, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. After all, she'd had the audacity to reach out just a week before my wedding. Despite cheating on me with my brother the day before we were supposed to marry, she needed to face the consequences of her actions. I told her that this was what she deserved and that if she thought there was any chance for us after her betrayal, she was sorely mistaken. She had no right to text me after everything she'd put me through. and I was almost glad to see her hurt because it was a reflection of her own choices. I spoke coldly, unyielding, while she continued to cry, claiming that if I didn't want her back, I should have just ignored her instead of going out of my way to humiliate her. But I felt no sympathy, not then and certainly not now. I told her to never contact me again and left her there, alone and crying in the hotel room. Now, with my wedding just 2 days away, I'm caught in a dilemma. Some of my fiancé's friends believe I owe my ex an apology for how I confronted her, arguing that no matter her past actions, she didn't deserve that treatment. My groomsmen, who have known me since middle school, feel differently. They understand the battle I faced with depression after the betrayal and how deeply I loved my ex. They supported my reaction and didn't believe I owed her anything. My fiancé's friends seem to have expected some petty drama to gossip about, but this situation is anything but trivial. Fortunately, my fiancé stands by me, insisting I have no obligation to apologize just because her friends think I should. If they are offended, she said, they can skip the wedding. However, her friends are adamant and have threatened not to attend if I don't apologize, leaving me torn. I don't want to upset her on what should be a joyous day, especially since her friendships matter so much to her, but I also feel no remorse toward my ex. If she had stayed out of my life, none of this would have happened. Now, she seems to be playing the victim, bombarding me with messages from spam accounts about how I've broken her heart and how I'll pay for it someday. This emotional manipulation doesn't sit well with me, neither from my ex nor from my fiancé's bridesmaids. I know my fiancé wouldn't pressure me into apologizing for her sake, but the mounting pressure from her friends is hard to ignore. I'm at a crossroads, trying to figure out what to do. The idea of apologizing to my cheating ex is infuriating, especially since she reached out just a week before my wedding. Update 1: The responses have been wildly varied, and with only 1 day until the wedding, I decided it was time to speak to my fiancé before making any decisions. As many suggested, when I shared my feelings with her, she reassured me that I absolutely didn't need to apologize to my ex simply because her bridesmaids thought so. If that offended them, she said, they could choose not to attend the wedding. She explained that her friends didn't truly grasp what had happened and thought I was overreacting, even after she detailed my ex's betrayal. Things that are unimaginably cruel don't deserve forgiveness, she argued. And when they didn't come around to her side, she told them they didn't have to come to the wedding if they didn't want to. She hasn't spoken to them since, and it seems unlikely that they'll attend. One friend even returned the cost of her bridesmaid dress, and my fiancé suspects that most will bail. She's putting on a brave face for me, but I can tell she's hurting since many of these women have been her friends since high school. Although she insists she doesn't care, I know it stings. I've decided to talk to her friends myself to try and convince them to reconsider. As for my ex, she continues to be a nuisance. Just a few hours ago, she managed to call me and spent 15 minutes trying to argue her case. She insisted I still loved her but was too proud to admit it, claiming that my effort to confront her only meant I had feelings for her. I couldn't help but scoff. The feelings I have now are ones of anger and disgust. She actually believed I held her hands in a moment of sympathy rather than shock. I laughed in her face during our conversation, hoping she'd catch the hint, but she just kept blathering about us being soulmates and how I needed to call off the wedding before making a huge mistake. The only reason I'm even entertaining her nonsense is to ensure she doesn't do something reckless. I've been trying to reach her parents to take her home, but I haven't gotten through. I just want to be rid of her for good. I still despise her, but I also don't want her to hurt herself. I'm not that heartless. Update 2: We're officially married now. It's been a couple of days since the ceremony, and I can hardly believe it. She's my wife. I'm elated, but there's unfortunate news as well. My fiancé's friends didn't attend the wedding despite my attempts to get them there. I personally called each one to explain my side and why I wouldn't apologize, but they didn't seem to care. Even when I asked them to come for my wife's sake, they refused, which struck me as odd. I would attend a friend's wedding regardless of my feelings about their partner. I discovered the real reason just yesterday when my wife confessed she suspected her friends wouldn't attend. Regardless of my apology, they resented her refusal to comply with their demands and felt the need to present a united front. These were her high school friends, and while she had managed to keep them in her life over the years, this was the first time they faced a serious disagreement. Their friendship was tested, and my wife chose me over them, which didn't sit well with her friends. She admitted she was a bit upset but was too embarrassed to say so. recognizing how juvenile it all was. I didn't mind, though. At least I knew this situation wasn't my fault. Her friends were just self-centered. In fact, my wife mentioned that part of her felt relieved they hadn't attended the wedding. It gave her the freedom to stop trying to fit in and to live life on her own terms without constantly seeking their approval. So, in a way, that was good for us. In other news, my ex's parents finally responded to me the evening before my wedding. I explained the situation in a hurry, urging them to come to the hotel and take her back for her own safety, as she seemed unstable. They had been on a hiking trip without network coverage, but now that they were back, they promised to come get her and thank me for reaching out. I haven't heard from them since, but I hope they managed to bring her home safely. Update 3. It's been a week since the wedding, and unfortunately, it's been nothing but drama. As I mentioned, neither my ex nor her parents contacted me after our last conversation. I assumed they had taken her home, but 2 nights ago, there was a knock at our door late at night. My wife and I were confused since we weren't expecting anyone. I foolishly opened the door without checking the cameras, and my ex barged in with her bags. My wife sprang to her feet, startled. Before I could ask what she was doing here, she announced she was moving in with us. She claimed her parents had come to take her back, but she had refused, convinced that I would eventually take her back, too. My wife and I were stunned, unsure of how to react to such craziness. Ignoring my wife completely, my ex insisted I let her stay, stating she didn't accept our marriage and still viewed me as unmarried. I was at a loss for words. While I couldn't believe this was happening, I also didn't have the heart to kick her out. Realizing she seemed genuinely unstable and needed help, I sat her down and asked her to wait in the living room while I discussed the situation with my wife. Thankfully, my wife recognized how serious my ex's behavior was and agreed that she needed professional help. I tried calling her parents again, but they wouldn't answer, texting me back to say they couldn't force her to come home anymore and were clearly embarrassed by her. It was shameful how they were ready to abandon their own daughter. With no other option, I called my parents, who arrived within half an hour. My ex had fallen asleep on the couch, which turned out to be fortunate. When my parents showed up, we agreed to take her to a therapist as soon as possible. There was no telling what she might do otherwise. My wife and I let her stay the night, feeling pity rather than hatred for her because of the tragic state she was in. Something had clearly snapped in her mind, and she needed treatment. The next day, we took her to a mental health professional, but she was resistant, insisting she was fine. After much struggle and some medication, she finally calmed down and expressed a desire to go home. We helped her pack her belongings into the trunk of our car and drove her home in silence, all of us unsure of what to say in such an awkward situation. Once we arrived, she apologized for the trouble she caused and expressed her shame over everything. My wife and I felt incredibly awkward during this exchange but reassured her that it was okay and urged her to take care of herself before heading back home. Afterward, I reached out to my ex's mother to fill her in on everything that had happened. I believe this finally made them realize the severity of the situation. She told me she had moved in with her daughter and would keep us updated. Despite everything, my wife and I sincerely hope my ex gets the help she needs and finds a way to heal.